that sorts of stuff.
Now, when was this?
This was in the 90s. Yeah, you've got a few years on me. I wasn't born until 78. But, yeah, you know, it was a big deal for me. And I always knew that it made it so that being into music and having that, it always let me know that there was something out there for me. And I never worried as a result of that.
Yeah, pretty much same here. You know, I mean, I gravitated towards old music too, but it wasn't because I thought I was born too late or any stuff like that. It wasn't like, you know, a kind of like nostalgia for a time that I didn't miss. I mean, it was none of that at all.
Yeah.
It's just that, I mean, I like a lot of new music too. It's just that I never liked the fact that I had to choose.
Right.
You know?
Yeah. No.
Like
no.
It where it hits you, you know, and it doesn't matter whether it's like something just came out last week, you know, or something I found in a dollar bin, you know, a week ago that came out 50 years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
I mean, it never was like, you know, any kind of like, you know, triggered, never triggered any kind of nostalgia impulses for me. I mean, unlike you, I mean, I was into a lot of old stuff too as a teenager. I kind of knew that there was that I wasn't alone because, first of all, it's like, you know, when punk rock happened, like in the mid to late 70s,
Yeah.
you know, it's forgotten now. But at the time, it was kind of understood that, you know, a lot of punk and new wave took off from 50s and 60s R&B.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And when I first heard bands like the Ramones, I was thinking to myself, this is kind of the stuff I heard on the oldie station, only with the amps turned up.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little,
You know,
a little
I
bit
kinda
more
knew
dinged up, a little bit more stripped down, you know, but still same thing.
Like, I mean, I knew that, you know, that you know that there were newer bands playing this kind of thing. Of course, I mean, me being like a teenager, I mean, there was nobody in my immediate, you know, social circle, you know, who was into it as deeply as I was. I had to wait till college for that.
Yeah.
But it's like, you know, I mean, I kind of knew just from reading fanzines, reading music magazines, that, you know, I mean, that there were others who were into this stuff like me, and they related to it on an aesthetic level, not a nostalgia level.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know? And so, yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea, the aesthetic over the nostalgic. Because when you put it right down to it, we didn't live through that. You know, we just have like ideas that we develop from photos or, you know, eyewitness accounts in some respects, but it's not really about trying to be like a Civil War reenactor as much as it's just a feeling that you have and that you just run with it, you know.
Right, and let's face facts here. It's like, I mean, as great as the music from that time was, I don't know if I want to live in that time because I'm a child of my time.
Yeah, man.
There's a lot of stuff in the 50s and 60s that I couldn't relate to.
Yeah.
That I wouldn't want to go back to. There are freedoms that we all have that were not there all those years ago.
I dig it.
But if I could get like the music, you know, and the aesthetics behind that, I mean, I know you have to kind of live in the time to really have that kind of frame of mind. But
right.
Like I said, it's like music hits you the way it hits you, you know, and everything has to have a techno beat behind it. I mean, you know, I'll be damned if everything else still have a techno beat behind it. But, I mean, you know, it's kind of like that. You know, I mean, it's like, as you know, I have a radio show.
Yeah, absolutely.
I hope you don't mind me plugging it.
No, please do. That's the whole name of the game.
It's called the Hoodoo Party on WLUW.org. That's 88.7 on the FM dial if you're anywhere in the Chicago vicinity. And I play like older rock and roll from like roughly 1950 to 1967, but I also play like newer artists in the same vein, like Nicky Hill, you know, or Bloodshot Bill, you know. And I'm always careful not to use the word oldies on my show.
Yeah, no, I don't want to go there.
I say vintage rock and roll, you know, or early rock and roll.
Yeah.
Because that's the way they do it in jazz. I mean, it's like there are people who listen to traditional jazz, but it's not like, hey, let's go back to the 1950s and pretend we're in the Village Vanguard, you know, or sipping espresso in a coffee house.
Right.
You know, it's just kind of like, hey, let's appreciate the music, and that's kind of where I'm coming from with the older rock and roll that I play. I don't consider it like a malt shop oldies but goodies kind of deal. I consider it like, you know, hey, these like the earliest genres of rock and roll, and there's some real good music to be heard, you know. And I'm exploiting a lot of the things that you don't hear on oldies radio, especially since now 50s and 60s kind of fallen out of the rotation.
Yeah, they truly have.
Yeah.
They truly have, and it's sad to see. You know, if I make it to being an old guy the music that is my bread and butter will be largely forgotten, the same way music from, the 1940s, it's not on the radio now except for under specialty situations. One thing I wanted to talk about, too, when you're talking about calling it whatever you're going to call it, I've had this theory that the genre classifications, and this is something that came from me running a music store and just dealing with this kind of thought process every day. The music genres, it really just sort of exists, in my opinion, for record labels to sell stuff to people and for people to be able to put things into a handy box so they don't have to think about it too much. And one of the main things that makes me feel that way is the way that most artists that we think of as being jazz artists didn't even like the term jazz. They weren't into it. I just watched a documentary on Lee Morgan, and he talked about how he would have preferred to have called it black classical music. And, Miles Davis was even more saccharine about it. He was like, don't call it that. Don't talk to me about jazz. There is no jazz. And, when you start to sort of try to move your mind out of that and try to just listen to music is just music, the same way that you don't need to classify every leaf that falls from a tree or,
right.
every ray of sunshine.
I kind of partially disagree with that. I mean, on the one hand, I realize that not everything can be contained into a box, and musicians borrow from other genres all the time. Yet, by the same token, I guess if you're a customer at the record store, and you're looking for something to spend, like, $15.99 on,
right?
I mean, you kind of want an idea, a general classification of what it is you're about to buy.
Right?
Whether it's like something that you came in there looking for, whether it's something that you're not familiar with, but you might be able to get into it. So I mean, in that light, it's like genres do serve a purpose. And if you were to ask me to describe any artist at all, I don't think I could do it without, doubling back to a genre,
Yeah, there's really no way around it. And that's something that I've encountered writing about music, as I'm sure that you have too. Sometimes I feel like all I'm doing is just ripping off Cub Coda every time I turn around. I feel like Cub Coda.
He was my favorite columnist in Goldmine magazine. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and like all those liner notes that he got to before we did, and like Guralnick, Peter Guralnick, and who was the other one? I met him. I can't believe I can't think of his name. Nick Tosches and Lester Bangs, to me, those guys are like, I always felt like they were trying a little bit too hard to be the angry young man type guys.
Depending on what they were writing about, I've always said that Lester Bangs' best work was written when he took the lampshade off his head.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Because all everybody wants to know about Lester Bangs is that, hey, this is a guy who got in fights with Lou Reed, and here's the guy who invented punk rock, and here's the guy who got drunk at press parties. Record company, man, where to go,
right.
Velvet Underground band, but there's more to it than that. I mean, I don't get obscure as hell right now, but I have a Rolling Stones like 1969, right?
Yeah.
Miles Davis on the cover. I think some of Lester Bangs' best stuff was in that magazine. I mean, he did a whole piece on the box tops.
Wow.
And this was before Alex Chilton was any kind of cult hero.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's really funny. I mean, he admitted that the box tops was kind of like, prefabricated top 40 teen band who were trying to go underground with their most recent record.
Yeah.
But he was perceptive enough to know there was some good music under that.
Right.
And in the same issue, he wrote about the Bar-Kays, the Watts 103rd Street Rhythm Band.
Yeah.
They're like these two self-contained funk bands, and he was probably one of the first to see that, funk was really black rock.
Yeah.
And right, it's like, I mean, things like that. I mean, it's like, that's the Lester I want to see, not the guy who took, like, 2 pills to sit up all night, banging away on his typewriter 1,001 words about, why Lou Reed is or isn't great.
Right.
I like Lou Reed, don't get me wrong, but
yeah.
That topic's kind of been overcooked right now.
Sure, yeah. Well, and once you start to buy into your own press, it's a dangerous place to be, and I think that Lester got there.
Especially when you consider he was basically semi-homeless at the end of his life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's it.
That kind of neutralized him in my mind. I mean, that no, this cat ain't perfect. I can still like his stuff, but there were some things that I kind of see him. I didn't know Lester as a person, but I kind of see how on the wrong day he could wear out his welcome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm still a fan after all that, but I'm just kind of looking at it just as a reflection of the way it really is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I don't dislike his work. I mean,
I sure don't either.
It's one of those things where I gotta kind of take a deep breath before I dive in. Yeah, I don't know. I always felt like, well, I haven't always felt this way, but in recent years, my approach to writing has been more and more to let the story serve the subject and not the other way around. Yeah, and I try to even eliminate I and me from the story entirely when I write. I don't feel like my place in the story even is a place. It's as an objective outsider as much as possible.
Exactly. I mean, done right. I've seen some articles where the journalists insert themselves in the story, and it kind of made it come to life.
Yeah.
But there's time and place for that.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I don't want to be looked at because I don't want to be considered. I mean, everybody's a butthole to somebody sometimes, but I don't want to be that guy. The guy that everybody talks about. He's so self-serving that he puts himself in everything he writes. This, that, the other.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I understand, man. That's always been my feeling. Who are you writing for lately?
I've been doing some stuff for the Reader.
That's cool.
And also a few other publications, including Rock and Roll Globe, which is a really good online publication. And as you know, I'm busy trying to finish up this book about Black Rock. Yeah. Yeah,
I've been following your progress on social media whenever you kind of chime in on that. How? Just a matter of like transcribing interviews at this point,
Yeah. Hoping that the tape came out well,
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I've been there. That can be a really tough thing to do, to the degree that's part of why I have this podcast. Some of these interviews that are on the docket were things that I was going to write up, and I finally was just like, I'm just going to put this online. Let's put it out there and see what happens.
Oh yeah, who are you writing for?
Right now I work for Tops, which is the magazine here in Louisville, and then I also do some really deep geek stuff, some comic book stuff for a British company called Eagle Moss, and they have a website that's called Hero Collector, and they pay you in pounds, and the transfer rate is really good. So that's something I'm very happy about. That's going pretty well for me.
Oh, it's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna turn the tables once again and play interviewee, ask the interviewer.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on Stan Lee?
It's nice that he lived as long as he did to see things come to fruition. That was always his dream, was that there would be a bunch of movies based on the Marvel characters. I don't think he was a sinner. I don't think he was a saint. I do think that it was a very big deal that he gave credit to the artists as far as putting their names in the comics. It's always funny when people try to run him down and say that he didn't give enough credit, but I mean, he was the first one to give names of the artists. Jack Kirby's name first saw print in Marvel Comics. He gave it all the way down to the letterer, and he was a self-promoter, shamelessly so.
Which was good for the comic industry, I would say.
I totally agree. Yeah.
If you don't mind me interjecting here, I mean, it's like I was a big. I mean, I kind of got away from it when I was maybe 11 or 12, but I was a huge comic collector when I was a kid.
Oh, cool.
And just like as music fans, we look at like Sun and Motown and Stax, like these mythical labels that have like all these cool guys hanging out, and there's like one guy running all. That's sort of the way I felt about Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
That's how. Matter of fact, the first thing that as a child, my first conception of New York was the fact that that's where all the comic companies were located.
Yeah, for sure.
And I always kind of figured that if I ever make it out to New York, this is an 8-year-old me talking. I want to see if I could visit Marvel and DC and probably get some free swag out in the
Yeah,
process, you know?
go to the legendary bullpen and see